Chinese health authorities are still working to identify the virus behind a pneumonia outbreak in the central city of Wuhan.
At least 59 people are relieved.
We'll just have two overarching objectives. The first is to
Passengers for symptoms of a deadly new virus.
Very concerning.
history and development of this ancient tradition. And then
England, Egypt's health ministry has announced a first confirmed case of COVID-19 in Africa. The latest Italian health report here says there have been 50, more than 50.
Yesterday I was the Queen of Troy. Today I am a prisoner of war.
In the New York area, a lot of hospitals are already running out of beds, mask supplies, and testing materials.
If you don't have a healthcare crisis in your community, please come help us in New York now.
Beforehand. Before COVID, I was working part-time, going to school part-time, and spent a lot of energy creating mindfulness retreats.
Before COVID, I taught students in physical classrooms while taking classes online over Zoom.
Before COVID, I was increasingly worried about Earth and humanity.
Before COVID, life didn't seem as stressful and things seemed simpler.
My life before COVID was fast-paced.
I had just transferred to UC San Diego and I was studying theater.
I was struggling to find happiness.
It was calm and quiet, and I was napping with cats and dogs.
In our time, we have a lot of isolation, exacerbated by the COVID protocol. When we encounter challenges like this giant pandemic, we can feel confused, overwhelmed, indulged in our energy, and deflated in our direction. We can become restless and compulsive, binging and leaking out energies in the 10 directions. And procrastination becomes a normal and natural coping process. So we have two choices. First is to rest and do nothing to replenish ourselves, or we get replenished through group energy so that we can be one with the others, to feel the same emotions, to shed the same tears, and to have our pain and reverence understood.
In the fall of 2015, one of our Italian students expressed a strong interest in the news. So much so, we fell into the habit of watching the evening news while eating dinner in our laps. Our Italian girl, Sophia, thought eating in front of the television was the greatest sin ever. So when the presidential debates were on between Hillary Clinton and all those Republicans, she thought she had died and gone to heaven. Sophia was as confident as I that Hillary Clinton would win the presidential race. In the end, Donald Trump would be just a footnote in history. By the time of the November election, Sophia had returned to Italy to start her studies at law in the university. You can't count the number of hours we spent on WhatsApp and FaceTime agonizing over the election outcome. It was unbelievable to her and to me that such a thing could happen. Sophia was only 18 years old, but her considerable intellect and fine education prophesied as surely as the Ides of March her great America was in for a long downhill ride.
Everyone says it only takes one thing to completely change your life. And I didn't realize how much one simple thing could change until March 2020. I remember first hearing about COVID and having my teachers prepare us for what we'd have to do if we switched to doing school online. We only expected to have 2 weeks off. We'd stay home until everything passed, and then we would come back to what we knew as normal. But, oh, how normal would change. Those 2 weeks did hit, and then they turned into 2 months, which then turned into a year. The way things changed so much so quickly still blows my mind to this day.
In September 2020, there was a huge fire outside of Brook Trails. People were evacuated, and the sky was filled with red and black smoke. Streetlights glowed orange. The sky was ominously black at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Puffy cotton balls, colored blood red and lined with deepest ebony, covered the sky as far as the eye could see, obliterating the sun. Houses lit up with lamp glow and came to life at the middle of the day. If this were a Shakespearean play, it would have been the witch's cue for something wicked this way comes. Little did we know, it was already here. By the time March rolled around, word was starting to spread. People I knew had horrible respiratory illnesses they never quite recovered from, a flu that lingered for months. By the time I started hearing about it in the news, they were calling it a virus. Now my husband, who pays much better attention to the news than I do, told me there was this virus making people very, very sick. I called in sick to work the next day, not because of the virus, but because it was a better excuse than I'm tired and I don't want to come to work. I didn't know then that I would never go back to that job. The beginning of my unemployment was nice. I've always been kind of a homebody, and I enjoyed those first few weeks of freedom to spend my days however I wanted. One of my hobbies is genealogy, and I use my knowledge and tools and skills to help adoptees find their birth families. I also love to rescue old photos off online retailers and return them to the descendants. So those first few weeks, I was happily occupied. But then came the order to shelter in place, and I had to stay home. Everyone in my household is high risk, and as the number of fatalities grew, the more scared we were to be in public. Even a trip to the grocery store required gloves, a mask, and a change of clothes outside the back door. Everything we bought, whether it came from Amazon or Safeway, had to be wiped down with bleach wipes before it could come in the house. Every night at 10 o'clock, my family and I took a bleach solution and a roll of paper towels and wiped down every common surface: doorknobs, light switches, faucets, countertops, door jambs. We washed our hands constantly and scrubbed to the bone.
In these waning years of my life, it has become increasingly evident to me that the degree which we are battering the earth, we are also battering the human psyche. The pandemic exposes and magnifies just how splintered we can be about ourselves and our personal ideologies with only token concern about others, the earth, or the myriad creatures and life forms that we depend on for our existence. So thinking about COVID and the idea of coming up for air, it might be perceived with much like taking a vacation from work, the constant drudgery of it all, a break in the routine, a time to reflect, or to just think about that which is so demanding, to recuperate, to digest, to regain some balance. As it is, much of our modern culture works to keep us off balance, with economics a major force, those constant 30-day needs, the rent or mortgage payment, the credit card bills, gas and electric, phone. They all act like a ball and chain around our neck, holding our nose to the grindstone. And then we have climate change and a pandemic, a drought, and a whole inferno of wildfires, and in some places, floods. Some say there is no hope, but one place hope can always be found is in the statement, "I hope this does some good," after rolling up your sleeves and doing whatever you can.
I can't remember when I first read about it. The first article I saved on the subject is from January 30th, 2020. It was about tracking the virus, and people in the comments section were still asking what it was. So it was clearly on my radar as early as January. This was a problem for me, because I was working at a big resort in Napa that catered to an elite clientele. Not only did I interact with hundreds of people employed at the resort, but every day people flew into San Francisco from all parts of the globe and filtered directly into my workplace. They could be fresh off a flight from New York, DC, London, or Wuhan, and I would shake their hand and welcome them to the spa before leading them back for a tour of our facility, all indoors. This is a job I had taken after moving home with my parents when I'd finished my bachelor's degree. So not only did I worry about my own high rate of exposure, I had to contend with the fact that if exposed, I would inevitably be exposing my senior parents as well. Suddenly, every cough that escaped me seemed a harbinger of death. Each day, as the news about the virus proliferated, my anxieties mounted, in tandem with the knowledge that the business would try to remain open for as long as they possibly could. Income and employment would take precedence above a nebulous, little-understood virus. Each day became an endless debate in my head over which was more costly, to leave or remain. For me, the job was always meant to be temporary, but 1 year had turned into 3. Stagnating in my career, I'd started making happiness elsewhere. In January, I'd won a part in a play, and in February, I'd enrolled in fiddle lessons. In March, just 2 classes in, the fiddle lessons were canceled. 1 week later, the play was shuttered as well. With nothing left for distraction, I had more time to dwell on the risks that remained, and was nearly on the point of turning in my resignation when I received word that the resort would be closing. I finally had time to research graduate programs. I finally had time to organize my room and my workspaces. I made headway on several writing projects. I had way too much time to read the news.
Foreshadowing.
I got scared when my brother in Arizona got quite sick with COVID for 2 weeks.
I got scared when Mendocino County's first COVID case was announced.
I got scared when my health started to fail for reasons unrelated to COVID.
I got scared when a cough was no longer just a tickle in the throat or a cold.
I started to notice that we as a people are more broken than I thought.
I started to notice there is a lot of ignorance in the country that claims to be the best one in the world.
I started to notice how self-centered our society had become.
I didn't notice anything.
During the retreat, I heard other people sharing about how much the parents meant to them, and I was left yearning. What was it like to be loved by my father and my mother? And in my ceramic class, I was asked to find my artist statement. What do I want to express through these pictures? And in my meditation community, I was asked, why do I care so much about what this difficult person thinks? And in another retreat, I had a slight crush on a monk, and I tried desperately to dissipate my feelings for him. I posed a scenario. What if my feelings were big enough to let this person be free? And in dreams, I was asked, when do I feel most safe and can easily let go? I remember sweetly a distant memory of a long time ago when I was a child in a hammock with my father. He told me this fairy tale so often that I remember it word for word, and I would tell it to him instead. The love and connection between us was palpable, and I can feel this warmth on the top of my head. And I feel safe and at ease. I try very hard to connect to my mom, but these harsh instances between us keep sneaking in. And she passed away at the beginning of COVID. But on a moonlit night, I remember these warm, fuzzy feelings of snuggling next to her every night as a child, holding on to her body, even if we might have difficult moments with each other during the day. And I realized this is where our love resided, and I feel safe and at ease.
Well, rules for wellness, or ways to wellness. Okay, tools for health. For you, your students, and your school community. We're all students, we're all teachers. So here's a suggestion. Reduce stress, relaxation, meditation, peace of mind, social and emotional learning for you to be healthy. Diet, more fruits and vegetables, keep regular hours. You get enough sleep, regular exercise, okay, excellent. I think we can all live with that. Hopefully, as long as we want.
As I grow older, I realize more and more each day how loved I am by my parents. A way my dad shows me love is by sending me text messages of news articles and clips every single day. They are mostly political or about global warming. Most sane people get their news from CNN. I get my news from my dad. The first time I heard about the coronavirus was through one of those text messages, along with an article my dad wrote on January 22nd, 2020. Because of the coronavirus outbreak in China, I am not going to watch the Chinese New Year parade in San Francisco in person. At the time, I ignored it, like I did with all the other sad and depressing news. I thought people were exaggerating. Wuhan was too far away. I was at school in UC San Diego, where I was cast in a play called Much Ado About Nothing. The performances took place in February 2020. I remember our director telling us that we may have a smaller crowd since the older folks who were at higher risk were afraid of catching the new virus. I felt it was a smart excuse so that people could avoid attending the undergraduate show. At the end of the quarter, in March, during finals week, I had a purchased plane ticket that would take me from the San Diego airport to San Francisco. But my mom expressed that she did not want me hopping on that plane for fear of the virus. She urged my father to come get me. I still thought they were exaggerating until I looked outside my window from the 4th floor and saw that students were moving out. On a Monday night, I was informed that my dad was coming to get me. I had 24 hours to pack all of my belongings. And in 12 hours, my dad drove the 512 miles from his house to my dorm room to come pick me up. I stood at the balcony on the 4th floor as I saw my dad rushing toward me. I know him well. When he snaps his fingers at his side, when he walks, you know he's on a mission. I thought to myself, my hero, my knight in shining armor, my dad.
Hey, Denise. So I watched that video you sent, the Simone Gold one.
Oh, I'm glad you watched it. I don't know how much longer I can stay sheltered like this. I'm depressed, Cody. I need people.
Yeah, I get it.
And this vaccine is causing all sorts of problems. People are having heart palpitations. I have arrhythmia, and after my heart attack, I just can't risk it. And Simone brings up all these studies of how they don't know what's in the vaccine and how these malaria drugs have a pretty significant effect against the virus.
I mean, she mentions them, but she doesn't cite any of those studies, and all reputable health organizations agree that hydroxychloroquine doesn't affect COVID cases.
But there are studies. And I don't trust those health organizations. I feel like big drug companies are trying to make money off these vaccines, and they don't want to admit that there's a cheaper alternative.
Okay, so to clarify, you asked for my opinion on this video as a source, right?
Yes, I really value your opinion.
And I appreciate that. Well, you're asking who's profiting off of this, but I feel like you're asking the right question in the wrong place.
Who's profiting off the vaccines?
No, who's profiting off of this message being put out into the world?
Well, yeah, they're benefiting off the idea that vaccines are safe, which is totally untrue, but that's beside the point.
That is the point. You believe vaccines aren't safe. Who's benefiting off of that argument?
No one is benefiting off of it. Anti-vaxxers aren't making money off not taking the vaccine. But Big Pharma is making money and no one is challenging them, which is why it's huge that an established doctor like Simone Gold, she's a lawyer too, by the way, is speaking out at great personal risk.
But it's not risky for her. She's not a doctor and a lawyer. She's a former doctor turned lawyer. She's no longer a doctor because she didn't practice according to COVID regulations, and now she's trying to use her platform to claim the regulatory system is corrupt.
She practiced against regulations for COVID patients. She had the ability to give patients medicine that the higher-ups refused to give even though they knew it would help.
Except they didn't know it could help because reputable scientists found negligible connections between hydroxychloroquine and COVID recovery.
That's not what Simone Gold says. Insurance companies are trying to cover their costs.
She studied medicine. Simone Gold was an ER doctor. Why is she weighing in on the subject of virology?
Well, because she studied medicine, she understands the science behind it.
Okay, you asked me for my honest opinion, right?
Yes.
To give you that, I'm trying to look at the whole picture. You're saying that she's an expert, but everything screams otherwise.
Like what?
Look at the venue. She's speaking inside of a convention event, inside a megachurch.
That's a church. It's got a huge stage.
It's a megachurch. Their whole purpose is to televise their message and get followers. And their message is that social distancing mandate shouldn't be enforced because the CDC is wrong. And so she has to go through every point they've ever made in order to invalidate the whole thing. She says vaccines don't work, that masks are ineffective, that social distancing isn't necessary. She essentially says the entire pandemic is a hoax.
Why are you getting so upset?
Because she claims to be a doctor and what she's saying is garbage. Can you not see how it absolutely benefits a megachurch to have COVID restrictions lifted? They're not even attempting to practice safe distancing. Everybody in that room just wants an easy way back to normal.
We all want an easy way back to normal.
Yes, but it doesn't work that way. People are dying whether Simone Gold believes it or not.
Simone is trying to spread awareness of truth. I'm a truth seeker, Cody. Her organization, America's Frontline Workers, they're all doctors who shed light on how corrupt the medical system is.
If they all speak like Simone Gold, their arguments are dangerous. All she did on that stage was fearmonger. If anything should put it into perspective, she was at the Capitol building on January 6th.
Oh, don't even get me started on that.
What do you mean?
They're trying to make us believe that people raided the building.
People did raid the building.
Cody, they were let inside the building. Police at the building opened the doors.
Yeah, because police at the building were sympathetic to Trump's rhetoric.
Trump had nothing to do with it. The Capitol Police opened the doors and tried to make it look like people raided the building.
What would be the point of that?
Antifa. Antifa wants you to think a bunch of Trump supporters raided the building. The cops who opened the doors are sympathetic to Antifa.
How on earth is that your takeaway?
If you can't see it, Cody, then I can't help you. It's as clear as day. I have lived and seen a lot more than you have, and when you get to be my age...
Okay, pause. I can't ask her to get vaccinated because somehow vaccines themselves have become political. And I want her to get vaccinated. I want her to survive this. I've known her my entire life. Her heart is one of the kindest hearts that I know. Her heart's the entire reason our family is still together.
And maybe you'll understand.
I want you to get the vaccine.
Cody, I really don't think it's good for my heart.
Okay.
March 2020. You know, it's easy to remember when everything started. I was 1 week away from my sweet 16, the big birthday I would unfortunately never get to properly celebrate. I remember having to cancel my birthday party, several times in fact. I wasn't really upset by it at first. You know, it wasn't a big deal to me, just another year, another birthday. My sweet 16 was spent at home with a homemade 2-layer cake with yellow frosting. I couldn't even tell you what I wished for when I blew out the candles, or if I even made a wish at all.
I remember waking up around 11 in the morning, slightly more tired than usual, but nothing out of the ordinary. My mother was in the office room next door awaiting our COVID test results we had taken a few days earlier, just for good measure. We had all followed the guidelines to the best of our ability. We washed our hands, we kept our distance, we wore the mask, we even kept our faith. Aside from my brother taking it upon himself to separate once he was informed of an outbreak at work, then there was really no sign of illness. It was calm. It was quiet, as my dad poked his head through the door. "Hey, son. If you need me, I'll be lying down in our bedroom. I'm not feeling the best." "Okay, Dad." My father is a route manager for waste management. It mostly consists of 14-hour-long days. It puts a lot of stress on a 50-year-old body, so there were days my father just needed to rest. So I thought nothing of it and walked to the kitchen. I grabbed a clear glass cup and chugged 1 or 2 glasses. I was thirsty. Really thirsty. Strangely thirsty. Like I didn't drink anything for hours. It was, notable, but still nothing quite alarming. I then poured myself some coffee that had been made earlier that morning. And it was around that time I had noticed that no one else was in the common area of the house, which was strange for them to be antisocial at noon, so I was curious. I'd walked over to the office where my mother had been finishing up her phone call. "Hey, Mom, is Clayton still asleep?" Clayton is my younger, bigger brother, so he's kind of hard to ignore. "No, Clayton has COVID." Whoa! I didn't really know what to say to that, so I just said, "Ooh." Slightly concerned, I then asked my mother, "Well, so what now?" My mother is by no definition a doctor, but has years upon years of medical experience in the ICU. If anyone knew what to do, it was her. All of our tests came back positive. There's no changing that. It's hitting your dad pretty hard, so I'll be taking care of him. We quarantined for 2 weeks and we're good. She proceeded to scoot past me and retreat to my father. I shuffled back to my room and sat in my half-broken office chair, facing my coffee mug I had sat in front of me. 2 weeks, I sighed to myself. I looked down and noticed that my coffee mug was only half full. Strange, I was drinking coffee the whole time, I thought to myself, proceeding to pick it back up and attempt to take another sip. As I felt the hot liquid touch my lips and sprawl across my tongue, I was immediately confused by the sensation of hot water. What the I examined the coffee to make sure there was actually coffee in there. And to my dismay, it was rendered tasteless. 1 day down, 13 more to go.
The event.
It became apparent early on that people will say, believe, and do just about anything. The World Health Organization stated that during the first 3 months of 2020, at least 6,000 people were hospitalized and 800 may have died due to misinformation about COVID, such as
an Iranian cleric told his 120,000 followers that taking cotton drenched in violet oil and applying it to your butthole at night would keep coronavirus away.
Bill Gates purposefully caused the pandemic and has a secret plan to use the vaccine to implant trackable microchips in people.
Somehow getting bleach or disinfectant into the bloodstream will fight off COVID because, hey, look how well it works on your countertops.
You can sanitize your money by putting it in the microwave.
Photos on social media showed stores with empty aisles, including the beer pack.
The only beer remaining on the shelf? Corona.
Democrats were behind the virus in an attempt to cripple Donald Trump's campaign.
And then there was the doctor from Houston who said you don't need a mask to prevent COVID because hydroxychloroquine will protect you. Oh, and by the way, there are some swell medical treatments that use alien DNA.
Wait, what? I'm not dead yet? Thank you for teaching us that viruses are not just for computers anymore. And thank you for forcing me to learn to cook, since all the restaurants are closed. And thank you for the microchip in the vaccine, which allows the government to read my thoughts. I've been wanting to give you a piece of my mind.
When I wake up, I have to swallow my saliva. My throat is dry. Why is my throat dry? My eyes land on the fan above the bed. At night, dust must have spun off the fan, and I inhaled it. Right. I look to my right, and I see my mother is still sleeping. Is she breathing? She's breathing. We're good. I shouldn't be here. I should be at UC San Diego, in my dorm room. I quietly creep out of the bed, and I go to the bathroom. I brush my teeth. The mint tickles my nostrils. I can smell and taste. We are good. I lean under the counter to refill the toilet paper. We are out. I go to the kitchen. They say gargling lime and salt water helps prevent sickness. I gargle. I hear my mom in the bedroom. She is watching a video of my baby nephew. We haven't seen him in a couple months, and he's already doubled in size. También te fastidia la garganta? Right, it's the fan, right, it's the fan. My stomach grumbles. I go to the fridge. We're out of eggs and everything else. We're gonna have to go to the store. Before leaving the car, we put on our masks and a pair of blue gloves. We approach the entrance. I grab a cart and I wipe it with my Lysol wipes. Let's make this quick. We need toilet paper, paper towels, eggs, and a pineapple. My mind owns a mental map of Costco's layout. If I head for the pineapple first, then for the eggs, and then for the toilet paper and paper towels, then we won't have to backtrack and we can head straight to the cashiers. My mom reminds me not to touch my face. Ready, set, go. We are walking past the electronics. I tell myself, do not look towards the left. Don't get distracted by the clothes. I peek and I see a sweater has been reduced by $2.99, but I don't need it. Keep on going. There are arrows on the floor that indicate which direction we should walk in, yet a man is walking in our direction. I hold my breath as he walks by and we pick up the pace. I see the pineapples and I grab one. Next stop, the eggs. There are 2 other customers inside the walk-in refrigerator. I wait for one of them to exit. We are only allowed to grab 1 box of eggs per membership, so my mom and I have agreed that we'll make separate purchases so we can get 2 boxes of eggs. Next stop, the toilet paper. If we are lucky, there will still be some of the soft kind. Last time we had to get the sandpaper kind because they were out of the soft ones. We are walking to the toilet paper aisle. A man and a woman with 2 children are walking in our direction. The kids are too little to wear masks. I yell, why on earth would you bring your little children unmasked into a store? But I yell that in my head so no one really hears me. I see in the distance that there are only 2 bags of the soft toilet paper left. I pick up the pace and I'm able to grab a hold of one of them before a man with his mask under his nose grabs the other. He coughs and I paralyze. I want to scream, put on your fucking mask! But I hold my breath and I run towards my mother with the toilet paper. Time to check out. We do self-checkout. An eyelash gets caught in my eye and it hurts and I want to rub it, but I remember I can't. We approach the exit and the person at the door reaches for our receipt. I don't like how they need to count the items we have in our cart. I always feel targeted when they do. Especially now, I don't want their hands on my receipt. I want to scream, do not touch my fucking receipt! Don't you get we're in a global pandemic?
It's 10 minutes to 9, and I'm standing in my room in front of a computer. I'm wearing a shirt that I would normally wear to school, but beneath this screen I'm wearing very comfortable pajama bottoms. I'm also wearing earphones. There's this little sound that comes on each time a student enters Zoom. It's like a happy little doorbell. Ding dong. I hear about 25 of these and say hello to each of the students by name as their squares pop up on the page. Some of the ding-dongs happen after 9 a.m., often while I'm in the middle of a sentence. I can hear the sounds of students as they enter, but the other students can't. I wonder how these students can't manage to get into Zoom on time, especially when they have nowhere to go in order to do so. They can just roll out of bed and log on. In fact, many of them do. The few times I actually see a student's camera turned on, they're often wearing their own comfortable pajama bottoms. I can hardly fault them if it's hard to roll out of bed sometimes, especially now. Each ding-dong of a late student trains me in the art of how to keep speaking even while sudden noises are blaring in my eardrums. I've gotten pretty good at it. The sound that still gives me pause, though, is the sound when a student leaves a Zoom meeting. It's like a ding-dong, but somehow sadder. When I hear this sound during a lesson, my mind reels through the possibilities. Did their desire to sleep finally outweigh their endurance to stay on the Zoom meeting? Did they drop their computer and have no way to reconnect? Did an emergency come up in their home? Is their home environment safe enough for them to be on Zoom at the moment? But no matter what, when I hear the sad little ding-dong of a student leaving, the worst part is not knowing who left. I trace the names of the participants list. Why is it so hard to see the absence of a name on a list when it is so easy to see the absence of a face in a classroom? Maybe if the student squares didn't move around so much on the screen, it would be easy to trace who was missing. Maybe if I wasn't looking at 23 black squares, it would be easy to see the absence of a face in a classroom. A happy little ding-dong. The student has returned. Jason. He's typing in chat that his internet just cut out for a moment, but he's back. I'm amazed at how happy that makes me.
Having to do school online was a huge struggle for me in more ways than one. I struggled to keep up with schoolwork and stay motivated to finish assignments. My grades suffered greatly, and that in turn left me stressed. I lacked the motivation I needed to keep up with everything. The summer was, well, I guess it was okay, as normal as it could be. Most of the summer was spent inside doing whatever I could to stay entertained. A good portion of my summer was spent doing a virtual theater camp, which gave me a lot of opportunities to explore theater beyond just performing. I learned about script writing, songwriting, set design, and of course acting. Over the course of a month, I was actually able to write my own original one-act play, my own original song, and I got to act in some of the scenes that other people wrote. I got to see my one act come to life via some of my friends, and I even got to hear my song become complete when the singing group recorded it and they added it to my one act in the final cut of the show. It was a wonderful experience, but after that it was back to school, online style.
We often want a happy ending to this pandemic, to make up for all the ongoing challenges, such as the days of confinement and the year contorted fears and grief that we had to run through. But the future and the past are made up of how I live in this very moment. I can't fall into despair or fancied evasions if I am paying attention and can spot that pothole in the road from far away. But sometimes I don't pay attention and I fall into the hole anyway. I remember going down to Oakland and I had to wait till 7 p.m. to wrap up the beehive for transport. And by the time I was on the road, it was already getting dark and I only had a light croissant for dinner. So the first hours driving back to Ukiah, it was smooth. But by the second hours, sleep was taking over and my eyes was shutting down. I had to jerk myself awake with just pure willpower and the survival instinct, and breaking just in time in front of some shadows and lights that my eyes could see but I could not comprehend. And then my eyes closed again and had to jerk myself open again. That last stretch of the road was so agonizing on my body. It was dominated by the mind and this uncompromising desire just to get home. I got home, but I had transformed into a monster, just driven by instinct and grunts and unable to articulate anything. My boyfriend was trying to help me move the beehive, but I was so rude to him. He was hurt, and I was livid. I didn't like who I was or how I was acting, but I could not stop myself. I was only a shadow of who I was, and the primal brain has taken over. I make a vow to myself to not go down that dark road again, so that I know others can be safe around me, and that gives me peace.
Sharing a house 24/7, there isn't much privacy or peace. Moods are contagious, and it's difficult to keep internal struggles to myself. Some days, it doesn't feel worth getting out of bed to pass through the motions of the same empty routine. Some days the wall of unread emails is as impenetrable as a stone edifice, the neurons in my brain firing like blanks, a noise that goes nowhere. Some days even the coffee lacks flavor, and when my mother says good morning, all I can think is, here we are again. Even as I remind myself someday this time will be a distant memory, that even these stale moments will be an invaluable treasure I'd give anything to have back. So I try to savor the moments, even as I stifle in them, angry with my inability to conquer a restless malaise, a voice that whispers in the back of my mind that I should be somewhere, doing something more, or it may never happen. But there is no clear path out of here. And once gone, I may never be back. Not to this time and place, with parents alive and able, with house still firm and standing, as the earth around it decays. Scorched by fire, desiccated by drought, blighted by an opportunistic beetle, time barrels along while standing still. As the passenger who sits passively inert in the cabin of a shuttlecraft cascading through the stratosphere at more than 17,000 miles per hour. There are monsters on every path. Regrets for the road not taken, whichever one it may be. And the best time of your life and the worst time of your life are the same.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Miss Farah. I will be your substitute teacher today. Your teacher will be out for the next 2 days, so I will be covering for us. Put on your mask. Thank you. So before we begin, let's go over some ground rules.
And condensing longer sections of paraphrasing. What I want you to know for a moment is about why we know how to use the words above your nose. When you write academically, I want you to think of yourself as joining a conversation. Gerald Graff uses an analogy to describe this process.
I think we often associate that word with a negative connotation. Your mask. But I would like to challenge you to find the power within vulnerability. I associate vulnerability with
phrase came from your mask. And so, your mask. Your mask. Your mask. Put on your mask.
Sophia's America is no longer the same country it was when she ate dinner in front of our TV. Sophia has started her 4th year of law school. We all thought the pandemic was the worst thing that could happen until the insurrection. There they all were, the so many people Sophia wondered about, the rabble, the mass of people wild-eyed like foxhounds finding the scent. The insurrectionists came at me like dogs on January 6th through the TV. They had found the scent, were running in a pack, breaking windows, scaling walls, uttering vulgar and guttural sounds like the hideous monkeys in The Wizard of Oz. Nobody likes those monkeys, and for a reason. They are stupid, brainless, dangerous minions of what represents the basest, most reprehensible, and ultimately incompetent force in the Kingdom of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West, today's Donald Trump. When I saw the insurrection on TV, I saw those monkeys. They were vicious. They were high on ridicule. They were carrying out the biddings of their leader who had been conditioning them for 4 years. He had invited them to Save America March. Quote, we're going to walk down and I'll be there with you. We're going to the Capitol. We're going to have to fight much harder, unquote, he said. It's back-asswards that the mob was there to demand their First Amendment rights. I want to tell you those are my rights and yours that Trump trampled on. His wrong-headed directives to Americans to not wear masks and to not worry about COVID and to not socially isolate and to take chloroquine or bleach and to say it would miraculously go away continues to cost lives. We could all put Viking horns on our head, bare our chests, and rage over the rigged election and demand our First Amendment rights. But we'd look and feel like idiots, wouldn't we? We would be like Max. We would be where the wild things are.
I consider myself a mask and social distancing prude, feeling that we should all follow the rules as required, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. I found myself somewhat judgmental, even when good people I know and respect highly at times fudge. I had not seen my oldest son and his wife during COVID, so when they came up for Labor Day weekend, I looked forward to spending a day with them on the coast. They had been vaccinated and we met, we hugged. We had a wonderful time romping by the ocean. When dinner time rolled around, we headed down to the Noyo Harbor and to eat at the Princess Seafood Restaurant. We went in masked and ordered and sat down. The staff were all masked and tables were appropriately separated, but of course, none of the diners wore masks. As we sat there, waiting to be served, we could hear music being played on the other side of the building. Through an alcove, I could just see a few heads and the smiling, unmasked face of a young woman I know, and I wanted to congratulate her on a recent accomplishment. So with my mask on, I got up and walked through the alcove to find a packed crowd enjoying the music of a live band. Nobody was masked, and maintaining 6 feet was impossible. Having already somewhat violated my personal mores, I continued through the crowd to stand before my friend and give her a thumbs up. There were others there that I knew, and I knew one of the band members. I loved to dance, and seeing a friend, I couldn't resist. As I worked my moves, my mask fell off one ear and dangled, but I continued boogieing. It was a somewhat extended piece and took just about all of my stamina, but for that 10 minutes or so of cutting loose, I was in absolute heaven. Doing what I did has gnawed on me. Is whatever will be an appropriate philosophy to embrace?
I asked you, do you always wear a mask when you go to work? And you said, always. And then Dad, you said, that's not true. And then you said, yes, it is. And then I said, we just saw you. We just saw you arrive in the van next to the driver, and neither of you were wearing a mask. So how can it be that you always wear a mask when you weren't wearing one 5 minutes ago? You know, this is how it happened to you guys in the first place. You didn't wear a mask because you felt uncomfortable, and then you both got COVID. And you were so lucky because you both survived it. You didn't die. But you know who hasn't had COVID? Me. I haven't had it, and I could die. I live with a baby, and he could... No, don't tell me to calm down, because this is calm. Uncalm, if that is even a word, was when my dad texted me that you had a fever and that he had a tight chest. Uncalm was not being able to give my dad a hug when I had to drop off the groceries you could not go get. Uncalm was thinking, what the hell am I going to do if I lose you? And I'm sorry I'm yelling. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I'm mad. I am so mad at you because I love you.
Okay, what were we looking at? COVID cases current and all throughout the United States, deaths, and the rest of the non-ill civilian populace. Great. I'll cover the data for these states and get the rest. Just let me know if you need any help. Okay. Okay, that makes almost every state, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 in the nation, reporting at least 1 COVID case and 1 death associated. What does my source say? Huh. That's weird. I'm getting 2 different numbers. Hey, Williams, can I get a second opinion on the states over here compared to the chart? What'd you get? Yeah, that doesn't make much sense to you either, huh? Yeah, what's funnier is that number isn't even the number that I got, so we have 3 numbers. Alright, we'll make a note and move on. We might have to go county to county for those ones. Anyway, where are you at with your states? Almost done? Wait, what's that? That right there. That number seems a little too big, don't you think? What's the population of that state? And how many cases were reported? Well, all I'm saying is that it sounds like a few thousand more COVID deaths than what it should be, just given the fact that the reference sheet was supposed to reference all this off and says otherwise. Alright, well, let's check it county by county. You get your messed up states, I'll get mine. We'll compare the good ones, and I'll take out any outliers. Okay, let's go 300. Let's go 127. What the hell? Number comes out to less? It's not writing for bad data. Where the fuck are these guys getting these numbers? Maybe Williams will get the same thing. Hey, Williams! Hey, look at this. These numbers are way off. You sure this is the right info? Yeah? Huh. Well, they're supposed to mimic each other. All this data is based on the same reports, but I can't tell you what to make of it because the math is all wrong. We're supposed to give a brief on this to Major Stewart. You know, what the fuck am I supposed to say? Well, sir, if you look over here, you'll see we only have about 2,000 plus cases here yonder, with only 2 casualties, but my buddy Reggie added all that up, and somehow we came up with 20,000 plus cases, and over 9,000 of those dead, sir. Yeah, I don't look like a fucking idiot in front of my sir, do you? Yeah, I didn't think so. Well, so what do I say? I have to give him an answer. This info's being brought to the beginning, too. I can't enter bad data. Well, I might as well be honest with them. I mean, stupid with my answer. Either that or just give him the old dad. Well, then how credible would we be then? Alright, fuck it, I'll figure it out. Oh, what do I say? Morrison, we don't know.
Riot sweeps Chicago. As a headline in a newspaper, I'm sure it doesn't surprise you. April to November was named the Red Summer. There were incidents of violence and bloodshed, riots, lynchings, and mobs across the country. Hundreds of African American lives were lost, and hundreds more were left maimed or homeless. I hope you're asking yourself, how could this happen in today's society? Would it surprise you to know that this headline is from events that occurred over 100 years ago? It was the summer of 1919, right on the heels of the Spanish flu pandemic. That was 100 years ago, so what? It's still happening today, that's what. I used to think that most people in this country were like me. I was raised to judge a person on who they were, not what they were. That skin color, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or even the kind of jeans you wore are not indicators of personality traits. They don't define who you are. I've always assumed that in this enlightened day and age that we live in, the majority of America felt that way. Sure, there are a few outliers, but on the whole, nobody really thinks otherwise, do they? I mean, slaves were emancipated over 150 years ago, and we had the civil rights movement, right? I mean, that fixed the notions of equality and inequality, didn't it? I used to hear people of color saying, it's because I'm black that this happened to me. And I'd get mad. And when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, I was outraged. How dare he? I couldn't believe that after all this time, people are still playing the race card. And then a man said, I can't breathe. I was horrified to learn that my whole life I had been living a lie, a great big white lie. That lie that white people tell themselves, that racism doesn't really exist. I'm ashamed that I didn't see, that I let myself believe the big white lie. The murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor pulled the veil of white privilege from my eyes, and it was painful. My heart filled with so much hurt and outrage, real outrage. I couldn't believe that what I was seeing was really happening. I realized that I'd been living in a little bubble of ignorance, floating through life on a cloud of white privilege. Happily so, blissfully ignorant. I didn't know any different. But that's over. I have been asleep all my life, and now I'm awakened to a world I'm not sure I like. I can no longer pretend that inequality doesn't exist. I can no longer look away from the injustices perpetrated upon people of color. And I have the pandemic to thank for shaking me so rudely awake. All this time we've been spending at home with not much to do, been more active on social media, watching more TV, reading more headlines, and we see. From late May to the end of June, in what has been named the Racial Reckoning Summer of 2020, over 20 million people protested the deaths of George and Breonna. And that says something to me. I'm sure there were not a lot of protests back in 1919, but today, people are speaking up and speaking out against something that has gone on for far too long. And that, my friends, is a good thing. It's been 100 years since that headline, and we've come a long way. But we still have so much further to go.
I watched a man die on live television. I watched a white police officer kneel on the neck of a 46-year-old black man until he suffocated to death. It was May 25th, 2020, in Minnesota. A teenage girl recorded the killing on her cell phone. Thank God she did, so I could see it, so I was not able to feel bad for a while, then forget about it, like so many other times when black men and women were killed by police. People rioted. I rioted quietly, safely, in my own home, in my heart. I cheered on the rioters. They said, "Say his name." And I said his name over and over. And I still say his name, George Floyd. George Floyd. George Floyd.
The aftermath.
Well, I started to experiment with ceramic glazes and new ways of firing my sculptures.
I started helping others who were less fortunate than I.
I started going on walks throughout my day when I was in the need for thoughtful solitude.
I started realizing how little I could do about anything except my own deportment.
I started accepting things as they are.
I started spending more time with my family.
I started washing my hands more.
I started finding new ways to be creative. I stopped doing a lot of things.
I stopped eating out.
I stopped putting myself in places where I was interacting with other people.
I stopped feeling I needed to be on top of everything.
I stopped comparing myself to other people's success.
I stopped leaving the house.
I stopped kissing my family on the cheek.
I stopped hugging people. My most enduring memory of the lockdown was the election. In my home of 7 cats, 3 dogs, and 2 humans, there was a little disconnect between the humans. They wore MAGA hats and MAGA earrings and Trump 2020 shirts. And there was a constant din of right-wing podcasts. And I had a problem. I wasn't interested in that line of thinking. And of course they didn't wear masks, and they didn't get vaccinated. And yours truly did. Did all of those things make me better? I don't know. You know, this tribal thing has gone way too far. Can't we all get along, please?
So we're supposed to talk about things we learned about each other in the time of COVID. I think probably the best thing I learned was that you and I can be friends as well as mother and daughter. I think probably we do better as friends than mother and daughter because we both have really strong personalities and butt heads a lot.
Yeah. I mean, we're not always the greatest at being friends, but, you know, we try.
Yeah, so what did you learn about me?
I think I was able to gain more insight into you as a person, and kind of the way your brain works and how you react to things. I mean, I kind of knew that before, but I see it differently now. I mean, we've been stuck together for so long.
Stuck?
Well, you know what I mean. Everyone's been stuck, but we've been in the same space without really being able to go to many places for so long that you start to see everything a little differently. I don't know, I guess I kind of understand your emotional and thought process a little better than I did before. I mean, yeah, we have our hiccups and everything.
And again, I think that goes back to us both being, strong,
Strong personalities.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll say that the worst thing I learned was that you carry a heavy load, both academically and emotionally, and that was hard for me to learn because I've always wanted us to have, this close relationship, and it hurts me that you don't feel like you can talk to me about things that bother you or things that are troubling you. You just keep it all inside, and I feel like that's a failure on my part, that you can't talk to me.
I mean, it's not really that I necessarily feel like I can't. It's just hard. I don't always have the easiest time going to you because I think of how often we tend to argue about things.
I think maybe I try too hard to show you that I understand or that I've been through what you've been through by talking about my own experiences. I think maybe I just need to focus on being a compassionate ear. So, I mean, it's hard for me, to admit to myself that, my daughter doesn't feel like she can tell me things, and that's, I know why, at least I think I do. And, it's my own fault, but I guess I just didn't see it before, and that you were keeping all of this inside, and kind of broke my heart a little.
I mean, that's something I'm kind of working on. I mean, I'm not the kind of person that shares my feelings, and I know I need to talk about my feelings because I just kind of suck at it.
I've just always felt that if somebody wanted to tell me something, they would.
Yeah.
I never wanted to force someone to tell me something they weren't comfortable telling me.
Yeah, I mean, something that I think I learned about myself is that I need to be a little more patient with you. It's something I've noticed I'm not the greatest at doing.
Well, I think you got that lack of patience, or you learned it from me. I've noticed more and more recently that I've had a lot of time to spend with myself, and that I don't have a lot of patience for, how shall I put this, for ineptitude or ignorance. And that's where I get frustrated, and don't have much patience. And of course, for stupid people on the road.
I was thinking about that one in my head. I'm like, no patience for stupid people driving.
yeah, that's true. Well, but I think I learned that you are so incredibly talented. You've got a lot of skills, and you do a lot of things very, very well. And I think I'm just more proud of you now than ever before, if that's even possible.
I think I kind of gained a new appreciation for your dedication to things. I don't know, it's nice to have someone close to me in my everyday life that's really dedicated to things and really passionate about stuff and is willing to give time to something they love, even if it's not always easy.
Yeah, it's a learning process, and I think we learned some really neat things about each other, and I think we probably learned some things that, drive us up the wall about each other.
Definitely.
Right. What do you mean?
Oh,
No, I don't. Wait, no. Don't tell me, because it'll probably break my heart.
Oh.
Okay. I love you.
I love you.
I have been vaccinated. Thank you. The situation seems to be getting better, except for the new Delta variant. My sister and I have been craving group exercise, so we have enrolled in a hot yoga class. I have been very careful for a year. I have not caught COVID, and I'm excited for this yoga class until we walk in the door and no one is wearing a mask. I am the only one wearing a mask, and It brings me back to the beginning when wearing a mask for the first time felt embarrassing. And that's strange because it's now turned into the symbol of pride and righteousness. When I wear the mask, I am protecting you, and when you wear the mask, you're protecting me. It's the right thing to do, right? Yeah. So no one else is wearing a mask. I look towards my sister and she's not wearing a mask either. I think about my nephew, Lucas, and he's not vaccinated. He's not even 2 yet. But if my sister is here and not wearing a mask, then it's okay, right? Because if something happens to him, then it won't be entirely my fault. So I take off the mask too. The class begins and it's hot yoga, 110-degree yoga, and the virus dies in extreme heat, right? Weren't they saying that maybe in the summer the cases would decrease because the virus thrives in the cold? I hope this is true. And maybe everyone here is vaccinated, although no one asked me for a vaccination card when I registered, so there is no way of knowing. For all I know, no one here is vaccinated, and if unvaccinated people are here exposing themselves like this, then I can't imagine where else they've been. Images of my nephew flash through my mind. His smile, his little giggles. Those tender memories are interrupted by the few news clips I have allowed myself to watch of people connected to ventilators. The instructor then says, let's inhale and exhale, deep, deep breaths. And I hold my breath.
You know, this last summer was probably the best one since COVID hit. I got to do theater camp in person this year, and what an amazing experience that was. It was the last youth theater camp I'd get to do, and I honestly couldn't have asked for a better return to the stage and a better farewell to spending my summers at theater camp. I got to be part of Willits Community Theater's production of Oz, musical fantasy, and I was also lucky enough to get my first lead role as the Scarecrow. Getting to be back in the process of preparing a show was such a wonderful thing to be doing. We had a pretty successful run. It was one of the most viewed shows overall, and our closing show broke the record for audience size with 150 people in the audience, socially distanced and masked, of course. Walking out for bows and seeing a standing ovation at our final show was probably the most amazing thing I think I've ever seen in my entire life. And truthfully, it brought tears to my eyes right there on the stage. I realized that it was over and I wouldn't get to act in the summer camp shows anymore. And that was when it really hit, that I'm getting older and I'm gonna start experiencing some lasts. Because life moves pretty fast, and if you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Within days of the world economy largely grinding to a halt, and people being advised to shelter at home, even the major news outlets were reporting an influx of animals cropping up in territories ordinarily monopolized by humanity. A pride lion snoozed on an ordinarily busy road in South Africa. A family of geese fanned out on an empty Las Vegas boulevard. A fox made its den beneath a boardwalk in Toronto. Cows sunned themselves on a Corsican beach. Deer patronized the retail stores of Japan. Turtles returned to nest along shorelines they hadn't been seen in years. Marine life repopulated the Venice canals, where the water had been restored to an unfamiliar crystalline blue. Wildlife of every fur and feather took leisurely strolls through deserted city streets, from Australia to Wales. Surveys suggested that many private citizens globally were prepared to permanently adopt aspects of the new normal in a literal bid to save the world. But are governments and billionaires even listening?
COVID distorts my perspective. In particular, it's hard to imagine what life was like before shutdown. In its own weird way, the past 16 months of social distancing has felt like a chunk of time that itself is socially distant from the time that came before it. For example, it's difficult to imagine a Trump presidency without the presence of COVID. Though only one of his 4 years actually involved COVID, his first 3 years feel further away from me than Wuhan. Trump distorts my perspective too. Life existed before COVID, just like life existed before Trump, but these distortions have the effect on me of feeling like these problems, Trump and COVID, exist in a vacuum, taken out of context. But they weren't. They each had context. They each had free text. That I argued with my aunt about Simone Gold's far-right anti-vax medical platform has nothing to do with the life or death stakes of COVID and everything to do with the incendiary news article that she sent to me right beforehand, right? That my mom and I barely talk now really has nothing to do with the fact that we've barely ever talked since Grandma died in 2010, and everything to do with the sudden cancerous political landscape we find ourselves in, right? Let's pretend that I don't resent my aunt for relying on irresponsible social media for news in 2021. Let's pretend that my stepdad actually listens to me. Let's pretend that being right doesn't matter very much. Let's pretend that being right doesn't matter at all. Let's just pretend, right?
Now imagine it's 5 years into the future. 5 years since I first heard the terms coronavirus and COVID-19. Since I first heard shelter in place. Since quarantine and pandemic became part of my daily vocabulary instead of just obscure terms in history class. Since life as I knew it changed forever. Since I lost hope for a better world for my daughter. The worst of the pandemic lasted 3.5 years. Herd immunity failed because we didn't get the 80 to 90% needed. Vaccine hesitancy and outright refusal to vaccinate left the door open for the arrival of 4 new variants, which spread too quickly in certain parts of the country. Of course, the initial inability to immunize children didn't help either. There are still uneducated and thoughtless folks out there, and the virus still rears its head at least once a year and reminds us that we are but puny mortals. So now we have to get a shot and a booster every year in order to keep the virus from completely eradicating the population. Instead of the path to herd immunity, we walked the path to normality. Kind of like being in the lead for all of a Jeopardy tournament, but in the final round, you didn't wager enough to let the guy in last place climb right over the top of you and become the champion. Yeah, that's not the best example. But it's one most of us can relate to. We didn't win because we didn't play it smart when it mattered. We have to do better. The thoughtless and self-centered behavior of some caused us all to fail the next generation. We have got to be more diligent for the one that comes next, and the one after that, and the one after that. We must take care to leave a better legacy for those that come after us.
The year is 2044, and all that we know is now known. Great cities and towns and vast countrysides now rot in its core of American pie, charred, choked with fire and fume, neglected and shunned, abandoned to doom. The lakes and rivers, once sparkling with life, are now dry and devoid of all left alive. The people who lived and walked in our streets are now hiding in fear, alone in retreat, to roost unchallenged by those who might dare to ease one's suffering and be held in despair. The air, the air, the air. It is thick and gray, astrewn to loom over rust and decay. Years of teeter and toil amongst brother and sister could no longer keep the ceaseless pressure. To fight is futile, to die is relief, or survive in contempt, divorced of your sleep. And we, who watched in shock as rifles and rounds consumed every block, were asked to stand with hands over fist and sign our names upon their lists. But when no hands had pierced the mist, their guns set fire and few had missed. So now I ask to all my friends who stand confused on either end, I ask how and I ask why did so many people have to die? Why? Perhaps we ask those who stood in our stead and see for ourselves what could have been said.
This is my home 10 years in the future. If you will imagine, if you can imagine 10 years in the future, and a lot of wellness advice, and what I hope will happen. For instance, we will be riding around in bicycle bubble cars, human powered, and everything will be groovy. Bluebirds will be singing in the trees, and the trees will be growing where the roads were. And the freeways will all be underground. And it'll be heaven.
A couple years ago, before COVID, with the Donald Trump POTUS and increasing wildfire devastation, I played with the ideas of how to craft a story that might help to bring us together and prepare us for the future. Stress and uncertainty appear to be the new normal, but it is apparent that the old normal, the status quo, has fallen short in the sustainability department. Coming up for air is to smell the smoke and to face a wave of environmental reality. So what about the bigger picture, the politics and dissensions, and the most ominous, global warming? Flood, fire, famine, and pestilence? What do you think?
What will become of us, and when? Are we Rome? A book by Colin Murphy compares what happened to bring Rome to its knees with what is happening to our society today. We would be smart to make the comparison ourselves. Ultimately, it was the growing corruption of the government and the arrogant dismissal of the world outside that ended the civilization. Kyle Harper writes, "The fate of Rome, climate, disease, and the end of the empire." In his book, Harper concludes that it was viruses, pandemics, and natural catastrophes that brought Rome down. In Collapse, Jared Diamond provides a cautionary tale for us. He writes about the vulnerabilities of many past civilizations. He names conditions that need to be present to bring about a near or total collapse of a society. They are what we are reading every day in the news. Collapse of the environment, international conflict, trade rage, climate change. Do these conditions sound frighteningly familiar?
Synchronocity. Our heart is moved by many kinds of feelings and emotions, and our body has their corresponding physical sensations and responses. When one heart is moved, other hearts nearby will synchronize and feel its effect too. Or when someone is crying, the rest of us in the room will feel that tug in our hearts. Or when we roll on the floor, laughing and just snorting so hard that our belly hurts, our laughter is contagious and fills up our body. In this past year, I had experienced many moments of deep connections, such as when I sang to my mom on the hospital bed and her breathing became more even. Or when the temple bell sounded and all of us paused what we're doing and breathed gently together. Or when we saw that surprise rainbow during a hike. Or when we all blended our voices together to sing the soothing songs for my friend during the death of her COVID-fallen grandma. Or when we gazed into each other's eyes, understanding and being understood without saying a word. We are connected as a group body, and that gives us a lot of relief and transformations. When we let go of all the noises and the burdens that we carry and just follow a simple routine, we naturally quiet down and reconnect to what's already there. When there is spaciousness inside and an environment that allows to rest and reflect, these deep connections naturally happen.
I took a survey of some friends. I asked, what makes you feel hopeful or positive about the long-term effects of the pandemic? Some responses were introspection, learning or remembering the value of spending time alone. Zoom, safe group interactions for workers and students and anyone in our lives. Musicians, actors, artists, and all of us figuring out creative ways of doing our activities. The uprising that occurred after George Floyd was murdered, protests around the world, including the huge numbers of protests in Portland, Oregon that went on for over a year and included a line of mothers standing between the police line and protesters. The total lockdown in Italy, where creative people stood on their balconies and sang together at a certain time each evening. In many Ukiah neighborhoods, people howled for 2 minutes at 8 o'clock every evening to honor and thank the nurses and doctors and other frontline workers. Businesses reinvented themselves. Gin distilleries now making hand sanitizers. And who can forget the sight of no cars on the road and no planes in the air, bringing no smog to the beautiful blue sky? What makes you feel hopeful or positive about the pandemic?
What I love about math is that I can eat in class. The strict teacher might not know this.
is that they force me to project my voice.
What I love about masks is I can make some facial expressions that I used to have to hide.
I love nothing about masks.
I love the creativity and variety of masks.
I love that I can stick my tongue out at people when I don't like what they're saying and they can't tell.
I love that they hide most of my resting bitch face.
I love nothing about masks. The Coming Up for Air Covid Collage Master Retrospective Fashion Parade! In the interest of time, please resist temptation and hold your thunderous applause until the end. First, we have the lovely and multi-talented My Tong, modeling the classic and ever popular So Sorry My. Only time will ever tell if it really works. Medical mask. Next, the very lovely and equally delightful Cody Phillip in the Wow, what happened to him? Did he have brain surgery? Speak and spell mask. Next is the winsome Miranda Swearengin in the very pretty but useless against much of anything Be the envy of all your friends Power mask. Now, lovely and talented David Severn in the newly remodeled Reid My Lips But Keep Your Distance Buddy Weird Health. And next, the very provocative Richard Rowe, modeling the newest model of the Squeeze It from the Outside of Your Nose. Haha! I'm safe, but you're not. KN95 mask. And now we have the always fetching Rickie, modeling the pretty and pink camel for the woman who has everything. What? My lips mask. And now the delightful and talented Phaedra Swearengin. Wearing the good for any politically correct sporting event, do the right thing mask. And lastly, of course, there is myself, Laiwa Dakota McKay, modeling the newest and latest in facewear fashion, the Darth Vader